Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's podcast. We're very excited to be hosting Chris Topham, who is a BCBA and the owner and behavior scientist at Celeration ABA. I know when some of you hear Celeration, you're probably thinking of standard acceleration charts, and we are going to be talking a little bit about precision teaching. So first, we wanted to say hi and welcome, Chris. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. I'm looking forward to talking about precision teaching.
Awesome. So if you could start by maybe telling our audience a little bit about you and maybe what brought you into this, focus of precision teaching. I think you're going to have to share your love for precision teaching a little bit with people who are a little afraid of it.
Yeah, you're gonna have to stop me sharing my love for precision teaching. So if I talk too much about it, feel free to cut me off. But so I got into I was a BCBA since 2016. I had obviously been an RBT before that and just kind of worked my way up. But I fell into it, as I think quite a lot of people do. I was actually like an office worker. I was doing scheduling at an ABA company, like a bigger ABA company, and I had no idea what it was. It was just better than my job at Whole Foods at the time, so I took that job. And I ended up having some great BCBAs that just kind of like took me out to shadow their sessions and fell in love with it. And I think it was maybe 2 or 3 months later that I enrolled in like a master's program at Arizona State to get my degree online. After that, if you look at my resume, I always say it looks like a little bit of a mess because I bounced from one ABA company for a year to the next, to the next, to the next, until I ended up starting Celeration ABA. Um, I think a lot of that was burnout and having like these large caseloads, but it was also my understanding of precision teaching and learning that pretty early in my ABA career and wanting to implement that at these companies, and just a lot of pushback on those things. So I was like, let me start my own thing where I can do this my own way. As part of that, I was a teacher at Morningside Academy. I don't know if you guys or if
Yeah,
listeners are
Michael
familiar
Fabrizio and Ken Johnson,
with.
and yeah.
Yeah, I did their summer institute program, and I ended up getting hired off the back of that program for a year. I was a teacher at Morningside. I kind of stepped out of ABA for a year or two. It was actually Celeration Education before it was Celeration ABA, where we were doing a lot of like the Morningside academic stuff using precision teaching. This was during like peak COVID, so a lot of online tutoring. And then when restrictions started loosening, I was like, well, I'm a BCBA. Let me like switch focus now to using precision teaching in the ABA world. And just it's kind of grown from there.
Wow. For those who maybe aren't familiar, can you describe what precision teaching is?
Yeah, that's one of my favorite things to do. I like to dispel, like, there's myths, I think, about precision teaching, especially in the field of ABA, where it has a reputation of being like fluency-based instruction for 1 minute timings. And like, I know people listening to this or in their car or walking their dog, like if there's one thing I want people to take away from this talk, it's that that's not what precision teaching is.
Kind of
Precision
thought,
teaching is not 1 minute 30-second timings on academics. It can be used broadly across anything that you're doing in ABA. So precision teaching is a measurement system that where you precisely define behaviors using pinpoints or operational definitions, and then take data on them using either frequency, duration, or latency. So there's no percentage data. It's like, call it a dimensional unit of behavior, something that happens in time. So frequency happens in time, obviously, latency or duration. And then we put it on the big scary blue chart, which is the bit that turns most people off that I've learned. But yeah, essentially you can use precision teaching in your ABA sessions without changing anything that you're doing in your ABA sessions. You're just changing your data collection system. And yeah, we might do some fluency building on some skills, but that's the biggest misconception I see, where people are like, oh, I don't need to learn about precision teaching because it's SAF meds or something like that, where we all did. Well, at least when I was studying for my exam, I made like little flashcards. SAF meds stands for, I think, say all fast, minute, every day, shuffle, where you're like learning terms, and it's like drill and kill. And I think people think that that's what precision teaching is, when really it's just the measurement system where we're using frequency
And I'm
and
glad you
changing.
defined that for people, because people who aren't precision-based teachers often, or even people who are just getting into it, will just do the timings and not do the teaching. And what's so important in any ABA program, as we all know, is the teaching piece of it. And if you're not
Mhm.
doing teaching and you're just timing over and over and over again, that's not learning. Sure, you're getting some data, but the data is going to be pretty flat because you're not teaching in between. So I'm glad that you made that distinction for everyone.
Yeah, definitely. I'm still learning, right? I know that Acceleration ABA is our name, and it sounds like I should kind of know everything about acceleration as it relates to ABA. But I think what helped for me making the switch over from academics and kind of making that switch in my mind is going over some kind of concrete examples. And I'm happy to do that now too. But like, how do we do like manding on the chart, like versus converting that into a percentage or one-step instructions or a task analysis? So, I mean, I'm happy to break those down because if practically it's easy for me to sit here and say like just take frequency data and put it on the chart, and it is a difficult medium to talk about it because you can see my face, you can't see a chart, or you're probably just listening to this, you know, on your headphones. It's hard to describe the chart and what that might look like, but practically in ABA sessions I think that's helpful for
Yeah, I
people
was
to
actually
kind of.
thinking of like the manding example. I think so many people struggle with how to measure manding. You know, we talk about how important it is and how many mans per minute, or do we talk about percentage of opportunities, or we talk about prompted versus unprompted? And what you're
Yeah.
saying, if you could take a measure of just frequency, like just count mans, put that
Mhm.
on a standard acceleration chart, and you'll get a lot more valuable information on precision versus just graphing frequency. Or could you say more
Yeah,
about
yeah,
that?
or exactly that, I think. Or so some people I've seen do it as a percentage too, right? So a traditional manding goal might be written as client will mand, I don't know, for preferred items with 80% accuracy across 3 consecutive sessions or whatever that kind of blanket mastery criteria that a lot of us use is. Some people might do it as frequency as well, but obviously to put it on the standard acceleration chart, we would just measure the frequency. So we would say client will mand 10 to 12 times in a 10-minute session or something like that and try to put that on the standard acceleration chart. But then it gets into like, where did you get that number from? Where does 10 to like, who said that you need to be able to 10 to 12 times per minute, or sorry, per 10-minute session? One thing that I like to do, and so there's no, as far as I know, evidence that says like, this is the specific number you should man for. But if it's in something like a classroom, we'll take like data samples of somebody who's like a big talker in the classroom and data samples of somebody who's not a big talker in the classroom. And then that's kind of becomes your range, and you want your client to get within that range. And we're also looking at like the functional outcome of that. So like, yeah, we can get them to 10 or sorry, 8 to 10 mans per session, but like, are they manding independently outside of session is always something that we're going to want to also be like testing for. Like, are these skills applicable in the real world? But I think the big advantage, and I'll try my best to explain it. I know we're not looking at a chart, but like, let's say a client has 1 mand and they go to 2 mans. The big advantage of putting it on the standard acceleration chart is that's a huge jump. You're going to notice that as a parent, right? Like my client had my child had 1 word. Now he has 2. That's a party versus, and that change on the standard acceleration chart is shown as a big step up. And then, so if your client has 100 words, for example, and then they've learned 1 more, which is represented the same on a standard interval graph, right? Or in a standard graph that you would see in like Central Reach or something, it's represented as the same amount of change. But on the ratio chart, on the standard acceleration chart, that's like a tiny little dot, like a tiny little step up. So it's proportional change, right? So going from 1 to 2 is a huge jump, and it's shown that way on the chart, versus going from 100 to 101, you're not even going to notice, and you wouldn't notice on the standard acceleration chart. And that I think is the visual difference. Like, it's showing you the proportional change in the behavior versus just kind of a linear change.
And visually, you've got, I mean, I did it old school, right, with a little ruler. But you know, you've got something to be able to measure that line as well. So that trend line, so that you can go, okay, so that leap from from 1 to 2 mans is quite massive. And you can actually say that is this slope, and you measure the slope versus 100 versus 101. And the standard acceleration people can measure that.
And it gives you
Which is
another
great.
dimension. It's not just about the number, it's about relative to like, you know, proportion or time or something. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, by putting it on a percentage, you're removing time from the equation almost completely, because you're saying
Yeah.
80%. And I'm like, per day, per hour, per minute, you don't
Yeah.
know. And arguably you could look into the raw data, but we're all so busy as BCBAs. I don't like, I'm not going back to look at the raw data, at least when I was doing like 3-tier ABA, and I was supervising RBTs. I'm not going to go and look and see how many mans that was. I'm just going to see, oh, it's 80%. Let's move on. And this is the reason that I discovered the standard acceleration chart. I should say I was like clinical director, or, you know, BCBA overseeing cases at a bigger ABA company, and my clients would get to 80% correct across 3 consecutive sessions. And the goal would go into maintenance, and then it would come back a week later. And I'm like, well, what's happening? It's not really mastered. And I just kind of fell down this rabbit hole of like, oh, like we could be looking at like the actual rate that they're doing these behaviors and then getting a more functional mastery versus just kind of this criteria that we all learn.
There's a lot of benefits to the standard acceleration chart and to fluency-based instruction in general. And one of those, it was explained to me early on, was, say for instance, you've got somebody who has quote unquote learned their colors and they can label 10 colors at 100%. They've quote unquote mastered that, but if it takes them 5 minutes to label 10 colors, is it really mastered versus someone who can label 10 colors in 5 seconds type thing? That's
Right.
mastered. Another example would be with reading, and this happens all the time. I use the curriculum Teach Your Child to Read in 100 Easy Lessons, which is a direct instruction program, and it's wonderful. It's a great little tool, but there's certain kids I have who read and they read very slow and it's just not fluent. And you get to lesson 100, easy 100 lessons. And by lesson 100, they're decoding, but it's still really slow and they don't have that fluency, and then I found Michael Maloney's curriculum, Teach Your Child
I
to
was about to
Read
say
Well.
that. Yeah.
And we've had him on a podcast. He's wonderful. And his curriculum is great because it's not all you read and you have to do it accurately, but then he has timings every 5 lessons, and he's not only timing the words, but he's also timing sentences and stories. And then you're like,
Right.
oh, okay, now these kiddos are able to read correctly.
That must be right up your
Yeah.
alley.
I was literally using his curriculum this morning with a client before we hopped on this call. Michael Maloney helped me start Celeration Education. Actually, me and Michael are very close.
Awesome.
He's a
Such a great
mentor of
guy.
mine.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to go back and find that episode that you guys were talking about. But yeah, he's a fantastic mentor of mine. And yeah, you're right. Like it's such a difference between doing something quickly and smoothly, fluently, versus just doing something accurately. And I think that's the kind of the missing piece that the acceleration chart and precision teaching fills in as far as reaching true mastery. I think the other part of that is there's a few acronyms like RESA is one, which it stands for retention, endurance, stability, and application. And those are what we're looking for as a result of mastery, right? So we can say like, yeah, we're going to get them fluent to 100 per minute or whatever the goal is, but we're looking at are those skills actually applicable? So we'll test it in like a different scenario. Are they stable? Meaning like, is the variability all over the place, or can they do it in the face of a distraction? Or can they endure and do it for a longer timing? So all of these things to test that it's actually like robust and mastered so that it won't pop back on my data sheet the next week, right? So I think thinking of mastery not just as hitting a percentage or also just hitting a frequency, but also thinking about it as like, what does this actually mean for something to be mastered?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a good take home point, even for people who don't use the chart or who don't do fluency-based instruction. You really do need to know whether those skills can endure over the test of time. Can they, can a student perform them not only for 10 trials if you're doing percentage correct, but for 30 trials, can they do it? Can they do it in one situation versus another situation? If things are presented a little bit differently, I mean, that's just good teaching. We have to be teaching towards that anyway. So we gave a webinar this morning on data-based supervision. And if you go into, a supervision setting and we're looking at graphs and the data and, problem solving the graphs, and if there's something, that a graph is stagnant, what do you do? But one of those things that we said was look at the dates and look to see how often the program is being run. And that's something on a acceleration chart that is just so awesome because every line, every vertical line is a date. So if people miss sessions, you can really visually see it without even having to really look at the date.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, it's standard, right? So every standard acceleration chart is the same, hence the name. So you can orient to it really quickly. Like I could just look at a chart that you're taking data on and I know that, yeah, it's these success in calendar days versus I used Central Reach in the past, but any like number of, data collection software systems, the graphs get skewed a little bit based on either you're screenshotting them and you're putting them in your report, or just the number of, I've seen graphs where like the more you run it, the like more squeezed together the sessions end up getting. And you're right, it's not successive calendar days. So I don't know if there was a week or a month that happened between these sessions. So, every other like natural science has these standard graphs that they look at, like doctors look at EKGs on standard graphs, and they're all the same, versus our field is, because we're applied and we're in the real world, right? I understand that it's hard to do, but by standardizing the graphs, you know, number one, we can orient to it very quickly, and number two, we can make kind of the same decisions with uniformity across clients and across programs. So yeah, that's another big feature of the standard acceleration chart.
Could you give us another example of like a skill that maybe a lot of us are already teaching, like that could be transferred, and how that could be transferred to precision teaching way?
Yeah, definitely. My favorite one to break down is like the task analyses and how to put that on the chart and what that might look like, because I do want people to get away that we don't always do drill and kill short timings, but for something like a task analysis where maybe there's motor skills involved, we might. So I'm going to use that as an example, but I just want people to keep in mind that you can use precision teaching in any number of scenarios. But for something like washing hands, I know a lot of us will use like a task analysis for that. Client will complete all 7 steps of hand washing with 100% accuracy or something. What we would do as precision teachers is would kind of break that apart and say, why do they need prompting on these certain steps, and isolate the motor skills involved most likely. So let's say like turning on a faucet, for example, like a twist motion. If they're deficient or weak in that motion, like their motor skill is weak, then they're always going to need prompting on their hand washing task analyses. What we might do is take that one behavior. I've done it where we've gotten like a similar faucet and just worked on them turning it in session before to fluency. But you could also do a bottle. This morning I was doing like the child's water bottle, because we're working on twist. I'm not sure if you guys or the audience are familiar, but the big 6+6 motor skills.
6+6. So I'm thinking that.
Yeah, it sounds like you guys are, but there's essentially like a set of motor skills that you can teach to fluency that are going to have, I mean, very far-reaching effects. And so for this child, his handwriting is deficient, the one that I'm talking about that I was working with this morning. So we're working on different motor skills. But for these, there are kind of evidence-based aims to kind of aim for that say like, hey, once you are fluent, so once you're up to, I don't know, maybe 20 to 30 times in 10 seconds, if you can twist that faucet, like that's, again, we're going to test this in the natural setting. Now we're going to go wash your hands and see if that was the cause of you not being able to independently wash your hands. And if not, we'll come back to something else. Like we can always break it down and teach something else. But what I love about that is typically you would only get like 2-3 opportunities in a day for a client to wash their hands. So they're really only working on that twist motion like 2 or 3 times. But whereas we like take 10 seconds and we're going to work on it 30 times. And so they're just, the progress happens so much quicker. And I think it's further reaching because now maybe their handwriting is better. Maybe they can open doors better. Now they can open that water bottle that they couldn't open before. So there's far reaching effects as far as like breaking these skills down into their component pieces and building those pieces up to fluency. But still, we're going to test right in the natural environment, because we could have been wrong. Maybe it was pinch that they couldn't do, or maybe it was something else that maybe they just didn't like to wash their hands. But you know, there's all kind of different pieces that go into it. But that's just as an example of how you can kind of break something down and teach the component skill to fluency.
So it's really interesting. We did the big 6. I do a big 6+6 fine motor. If anybody wants more information on that, Google it. We can put it in the session notes as well. But the big 6+6 fine motor it's got pinch, it's got turn, it's got shake, it's got reach, point.
Grasp.
I think there's more than 6 actually, but anyway,
there's 12.
There's
I
6.
think 6+6.
6+6. Anyway, with that
12.
being said, we taught one learner the skills, and we taught them to fluency, and she did a great job on it. And then she goes back to her OT appointment, and her OT was like, see, isn't it great? The things that I'm doing with her have really
exact
changed
same
our
thing.
lives. And you're like, oh yeah. That's all on you for sure.
I've had the
One session
exact
she's
same
got every
thing.
3 weeks. It's totally you.
Yeah.
No, it's such a good example, because so often we just look at hand washing as this like granular skill that we have to just repeat it, and they're not getting it, and like thinking about it from a different perspective of let's just practice. And even if like you're doing it to fluency, which is great, but just thinking about it in a different way, that like kind of like take a step back and think about what are they really struggling with, and how can we teach so that it's more about the teaching than the data, because our data will just keep repeating themselves if we're not teaching. So I think that's really important. I also love something you mentioned in that your company is all BCBAs, and you actually have a 1-tier model. So tell us a little bit more about that and why you made that decision.
Yeah. So yeah, we exclusively hire BCBAs. We do all the direct work ourselves. There's no RBT position. We find that when BCBAs are working directly with families, there's a lot of benefits, and I love RBTs. I was one, but I think you kind of grow into becoming a BCBA, and then it's interesting. You kind of see BCBAs that want to be that supervisor position. They feel like they've done their time now, and they want to
Totally.
be the computer BCBA. And then I was very much the opposite. I was always like, I'm here, RBT, like sit in the back for a minute. I'm gonna do my thing, and then I would have to like talk to myself to be like, hey, like they need to come in at some point, and I need to train them and like have them do the actual work. So almost to a fault, that's just kind of who I am as a BCBA. But I think the main thing is burnout in the field. I think it's being talked about much more now, but like when I was a clinical director, I was expected to bill 30 billable hours a week, as well as like kind of oversee a team of BCBAs and make sure they bill 30 billable hours a week. So by BCBAs doing the direct work, we've been able to put that at 18 to kind of 22 direct billable hours that our BCBAs are doing and that usually comes between like 1 to 3 families. So I've tried to, like, as I've started and I'm growing this company, really focus on like a balance of, we need this time as BCBAs with our clients to do direct work, but we also need like some time to think. I just felt like I had no time to think or to program. And yeah, some things you're able to do in your indirect time, but like for me, it was hectic. I'm sure a lot of BCBAs have the same experience. And I think that the field is shifting more now as people are talking about it into fewer billable hours. But I remember being a BCBA and it just kind of being like, this is like a good week for me was when I didn't get the email from my clinical director saying, why aren't you at 30 billable hours a week? And it was just too much. So it improves work-life balance. And I think the strong family connection and ultimately more practiced and experienced people coming in to provide the services have just enabled us to kind of see amazing results.
I think it's so true. I interview too many people who are just graduating their masters and are like, I'm done with direct work. I don't want to see a client. I'm just going to be doing my paperwork, but I'm really good at the paperwork. And I'm like, that's not, it's not what we're looking for. I think we as a field have now all this experience and all this practice and all this education. We should be offering it directly to our clients, to our families, to be able to, like you said, like want to just jump in because we have the skills to do it. And I think the clients and families you're servicing are probably getting such a better quality of care than even if you were billing whatever it is that you were billing. It's more about the quality than the quantity. And so I'm sure it's like a better product than as many, the multi-tier system. And I know a lot of us are rethinking that model for a lot of reasons, for the burnout, for the quality, for the integrity. And I think more BCBAs, I think, should have the attitude that you have, which is like, I'm in this field because I want to be. I don't want to be the computer BCBA. I want to really help the family and the kids. And so I think for anyone listening to this, that's such an important message.
You also have to think about how people learn best. And I don't know about everybody else, but I learn best by doing. And I think a lot of people really do. And if you've hired BCBAs, especially in a fluency-based instruction, and fluency is not new and it's not, but I feel like a lot of people think it's novel and a lot of people have come from a percentage correct background. So they're learning and they're getting to learn by doing versus learning by watching. And that is huge as well. So as a BCBA coming into an organization like yours, it's amazing because, well, they get to have fun every day. They're working with kids instead of paperwork. And I know some people would argue differently, but isn't that why you got into the field? But secondly, it's like they're really learning skill and they're learning to do things competently. While getting compensated like a BCBA. And that's one thing that Sheer and I see a lot is, we've got newly minted BCBAs who come into our community and they say they've had poor supervision or they're not quite sure. And they're coming with a lot of questions, which I'm glad they've got those questions. But at the same time, it'd be nice for people to do more hands-on while they're a BCBA.
Yeah, exactly that. I think, we're such a small group of BCBAs right now that we're able to, service the families that we are servicing. One concern that I have is just kind of there's not enough BCBAs for like as a long-term solution. I don't think this is it. Like I love one-tier ABA and I advocate for it a lot on like my social media and stuff, but I do have to like take a step back and reflect that like there's a lot of families that can't afford that service or that, there's just not enough of us. We need more BCBAs. But it's always been interesting to me that like if you're an SLP or you're an OT, you're doing the direct work. But like us as BCBAs, it was almost like the further up I got, like I said, I was at bigger ABA companies, regional director, and it's like I don't see kids anymore. This is depressing. This is just not what I got into the field for. It's not what I fell in love with at that first company that I mentioned. So yeah, it's an interesting dynamic, and I don't know that one-tier ABA is the long-term solution, but it's it's been a great couple of years since we've started doing it this way.
Yeah, it may not be sustainable over time, but for now, like it is wonderful. And the more you can do it, I think it's great.
Mhm. What would you say to somebody who might be listening to this, who's interested in getting started with precision teaching? What could be either something that they could, a resource you could refer them to, or something that they could get started tomorrow if it's possible to do something related to precision teaching and with their clients?
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of good resources online for learning the Standard Celeration chart. In particular, I would say join the Standard Celeration Society Facebook group. They're super nice, super helpful, always answering any questions that people post in there. But there's a lot of people kind of trying to disseminate it. It's something that I've tried to do on our social media as well. But I can think of like Amy Evans or Jared Van or these people on social media that are, trying to push it into more people's hands as far as just like, hey, precision teaching exists. But there's also the conference upcoming in November that I'll be going to, the Standard Celeration Society conference. I think it's the first weekend in November. I don't know I think it might be 7, 8, 9, and it's in Albuquerque, New Mexico, which is not the most exciting place, but hey, it's a great conference. I think the first time I ever went to that conference in 2017, I remember coming home, and my roommate at the time, also a BCBA. Now I believe he was an RBT then, but BCBA now. So shout out to him. But he was asking me how did the conference go, and I remember saying life changing, and it really was. Like the community are so welcoming, and always looking for people to take under their wing. In fact, there's something in precision teaching where you are supposed to find so I have a chart parent. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but Amy Evans, who I mentioned
I do
before,
too.
it is my chart mom because she taught me how to chart, and my wife is somebody that I taught to chart, so technically my chart child, which is odd, but like you're
Awkward.
supposed to,
Weird.
you're supposed to find, that's how it's supposed to disseminate, right? And I think you can kind of trace it all the way back to Ogden Lindsley if you say like, okay, who taught Amy Evans to chart? Maybe Rick Gabina, and then it kind of goes all the way back, and you can say like, oh, like I'm like 5th generation charter, which I think is really nerdy and cool, but you're supposed to kind of like, so if anybody wants to learn, you can always reach out to me. I'm always happy to get a
You're
new
looking for a new chart child.
Yeah, new chart children, as many as I can have.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And then one of the things we like to ask our guests towards the end is because, we have a community of BCBAs, some of whom are newly minted. What is some general advice? It could be, maybe related to
Yeah.
teaching,
No,
but I see what happens.
I had an answer prepared for that, but I answered it with the last question. I think it was learn precision teaching and find a mentor in the precision teaching community. But what I will say is find a company that works for you. Like I said, I bounced from one ABA company to the next for a long time. My resume looks like a mess. It looks like this guy can't decide where he wants to be until I started my own thing. And I'm not saying everybody has to start their own thing, but I think as we're shifting as a field to be more aware of burnout happening to BCBAs, I think there's a lot of options out there for BCBAs. So there's a handful of companies out here, I don't know about nationwide, but in California that do the one-tier ABA model. So, look into something like that. We're hiring, just putting that out there as well. But yeah, I would say just for newly minted BCBAs, kind of explore those options. Don't feel like you just kind of have to stay at like the big box ABA company that you were an RBT at for your whole career. Explore the options that are out there and learn precision teaching.
So how can people find out more about you or get in touch with you?
Yeah, so it's at Celeration ABA on all the social media or celerationaba.com. I'm trying to get more posts going now that I work with just one family now, so I'm kind of having more time to be able to actually grow the business. So we're doing a lot of posting on social media and stuff like that. But yeah, Instagram is probably where we're the most prominent. So check us out. Check us out there.
Well, I think you've convinced me. So I'm going to
Yeah.
have to go dig into my standard acceleration chart resources
Awesome.
and do some more learning on that. But thank you for sharing your passion for this. And I think it's really comes from a place of wanting to help the families and the kids and giving them the best service that we can. And I think that that's really, really amazing. So thank you.
Thanks, Chris. It's been wonderful.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.